Hello and welcome to A Fountain of Useless Information, a micro podcast hosted by Ann O'Connor. Each 15-minute episode will feature a person, much like yourself, who knows something unusual, interesting, and maybe even zany that is near and dear to their heart. Today in the studio, we have John King from Townsend. Hi, John.
How are you?
I'm just fine. How are you?
Good.
That's good. John is a master spinner. I have seen him spin things that I never realized could be spun. Newspaper comes to mind. He's nodding.
Yep. Yeah, that was for one of the art shows at the gallery in Townsend at the Townsend Public Library.
Wow.
I did spin paper. That was funny. Yeah, I forgot about that one.
Yeah, I didn't. After all, this is a fountain of useless information we're on.
There you go.
There you go. So, John, why do you spin? Why do you like it?
I found this spinning wheel, Ludi, 23 years ago when I was at a flea market in Wellfleet. The guy wanted $22 for it, and I talked him down because it was broken. Talked him down to 18, and I've always been fascinated with people who spin. When I was a kid, I was in 4-H, and I would see the people in the sheep barn spinning, and so it was something I always wanted to do. I was a home ec teacher, so I sewed, but I had never spun, and I found this wheel, and it was a wicked cheap price, and that's what started me down this path.
So that's your original wheel. It looks like it's about 3 feet tall, 2.5, 3 feet tall. And it has one big wheel, then it has a little assembly on the part that's towards you.
That's called the flyer and the bobbin.
Okay. So what you're doing is I see you pinching, I guess that's called roving, between your fingers. And you're doing something with your feet. There's a pedal there.
So I treadle my foot up and down. I treadle not very fast, a couple of beats a minute. And that causes the drive wheel to spin, and then the drive wheel causes the bobbin to spin, and that causes the flyer assembly to spin, which then adds twist to the yarn, and that's how you make yarn.
Okay. Can we have a little demo of that? This sounds pretty cool when you do it.
So it's just repetitive over and over again. I just keep feeding the fiber in, and if I want a thin yarn, I draw it out very, very slender between my hands. If I want thicker yarn, then I feed the fiber in faster, the roving in faster, and that makes for thicker yarn. I can also change the size of my yarn by combining more than one thread together. After I make one, I can make 2 or 3 and combine them together to make a thicker yarn.
Okay. There was something I was going to say. It completely popped out of my mind. Oh, well.
I can also add little decorative elements. I can make slubs that, add visual interest to the yarn. I can add different colors together. So, you can make the yarn that you want to make out of doing whatever. And like you said, you can spin more than just wool. Wool is my favorite thing to spin, but you can spin mohair that comes from goats. You can spin angora that comes from rabbits. You can spin paper that comes from trees. You can spin flax, which becomes linen when you weave it. Cotton, which is really short-stapled, is a pain to spin.
Okay.
But yeah, that's...
Okay.
But this is my main wheel.
Okay.
The Luye. It's from the 1970s.
All right, because I see that you have 2 wheels with you. And one thing that I noticed, because I'm really interested in industrial history, is that it's sort of geared in that there's one really big wheel that goes kind of slow.
Yeah.
And then there's smaller spindles and things that go faster.
Very good. Yeah.
Yeah. So I do have to tell you, John's a middle school science teacher, so he's into these kind of things too.
So the other wheel I brought with me is a different style of wheel. It's based on a Saxony wheel, which came from Germany originally. It has a I would say it's close to 3 foot wide, drive wheel, and then it has the bobbin down at the other end and the flyer assembly. Um, and they're from the late 17, early 1900, or they were made just over 100 years, from the late 1700s until the 1940s. And they're a style of wheel called Canadian production wheels. And in this case, this is an early one because it has the screw tension. Later on, they made a tilt tension, and they were designed to spin yarn very, very fast. And then that yarn would be taken to the mills in Quebec to be woven into fabric. We started, not we, but the mills were weaving before they were spinning yarns. And so wool merchants would purchase fiber, it would be washed and carded, and then it would be taken out into the countryside where women usually would spin it into yarn, and then the wool merchant would go back through his circuit, picking up yarn, dropping off more wool, and then that yarn was then taken into the mills to be woven. So it was a cottage industry that we don't have anymore, but those wheels have survived, and they're great wheels, even though they maybe 150 years old. They still work really, really well, and they do exactly what they were designed for. They spin really fine yarn that's great for weaving or knitting, and they spin really, really fast. It was a learning shift for me when I went from my Luye to the Canadian production wheels, because they want you to feed the fiber in really, really fast. They're a hungry wheel, and they're also very beautiful. They're the kind of wheel that you think of when you think of a spinning wheel.
Yeah, it is a gorgeous piece of wood. You can see all the use it's had. You can see where people's hands have worn it down. Do they still spin by hand for the more elite tweeds, like the Harris tweeds and in Shetland?
There is a lot of hand spinning up in Shetland. There's the Harris tweeds. Some of those are actually woven by hand. Most of the spinning is done commercially, from what I've seen. But I follow somebody on Instagram that has a foot-pedaled loom, and you can see her sitting at her loom pedaling like on a bike, and that's what provides the power for the wheel to weave the fabric that she makes. And I noticed the other day that she has a piece of fabric that has just come off her loom that's headed to Nova Scotia. There's a big connection between Scotland and Nova Scotia. And she's sending it to Nova Scotia, and they're going to walk it. You know what wool walking is?
I do. I even knew a song about it at one point.
Oh.
It's too bad we didn't have it. We could do it right here on this table. Well, no, we couldn't, because what does it involve, John?
It involves a lot of hot, soapy water and people sitting around a table in a circle. And what I've seen is it's usually women that are sitting there doing the spinning, doing the singing as they are scrunching the wool together. And what that does is it basically felts it. The real word is fulling. But what it does is it tightens the fabric up so that it becomes more weather resistant.
And the word is walking, just so people know, Waulking. And it is a traditional thing. Didn't they use urine as the fulling mechanism at one point?
Yep.
Yeah.
I do know that at one point, I believe it was a convent of nuns that were into weaving and spinning and weaving, and they found that using urine from the young novices was the best. The young men novices had the best urine for working with the wool. Okay,
yeah. I mean, these kind of substances we tend not to use nowadays, but I think it also comes. We still use some of the terms. For example, they didn't have a pot to piss in,
right,
and that meant they didn't have enough money to buy a container to sell their urine to the fullers.
Yeah. Yep. That's exactly right.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, what happens to this yarn or thread once you've made it?
So, I make yarn, and then I can take my yarn and I can knit that into hats. I have a little tradition at school where whenever somebody has a baby at school, I make them a baby hat for their babies. It's kind of cool to think that I take this stinky fiber from sheep and I can turn it into a baby hat that, is
Soft enough for baby. Yeah. So what kind of condition are the fibers in when you get them?
They're coated in lanolin because that's how sheep keep waterproof. And some sheep make more lanolin, some sheep make less. So it's coated in lanolin. I usually get wool that's been skirted. So the shepherd has taken any parts that has poop on it or any of the real bad parts that have a lot of hay in it, and they've discarded that. And so then I get the wool that probably has some hay in it. We call it vegetable matter, bits of grass, sticks, sometimes a bug or two. So that's when I get the yarn, the fiber. And then I take the fiber and I soak it, usually overnight, in cold water. That loosens up a lot of the dirt. I then take that out so I can leave the dirt behind. I dump that out. I fill my wash tub up with hot water. I put it in an outdoor spigot, which if you're going to get into fiber arts, an outdoor hot water spigot is a wonderful thing because then you're not lugging buckets of hot water through your house, spilling on the floor and making your wife say, I can't believe you did that again.
It's one way to get the floor clean, though, when you mop it up.
That is true. Mop it up. I'm busy doing wool. I can't deal with that. But I then wash it usually twice. I use Dawn. I'm cheap. I'm an old Yankee. I'm very cheap. Other people will buy.
So once you get it washed, then you comb it somehow.
Yes. I have with me a set of combs that I made. Comb them apart in opposite directions. And what that's doing is it's pulling out all the vegetable matter that may not have gotten washed out. And the short fibers get left behind. The longer fibers will get left behind. And I'll comb this 2 or 3 times back and forth. And then I take those fibers and I pull them off in a small chain, I guess you could call it. And I'm pulling this fiber off, trying to keep it in one continuous chain. And that is what's called roving.
It's a very labor-intensive procedure.
It is, but like we were talking earlier, it's almost like a meditation. I don't always have a purpose for what I'm spinning, but sometimes it's just to make yarn and enjoy the meditation. Other times it's because I have a project in mind.
Johnson Townsend, and he runs something called Fiber Frenzy at the Townsend Public Library.
Fiber Frenzy started out because I'm not really a great knitter, and so I would go to the knitting club, but I'm really not a knitter, and so I would go with my wheel, and I'd sit over on the side, and we'd visit, and we'd have a great time. They would always be after me to be knitting, and I'd always be after them to start spinning because none of them spun. And so I talked with the library, and we started our Fiber Frenzy group, and it's been going for quite a while. We started it before COVID, and I want to say we're still in the old building when we started Fiber Frenzy.
Wow.
And we would meet in the town hall in the
Well,
basement.
that's like well over 10 years ago then, 12 years that the new building's been there for a while.
So, and we have a really good time. It's not a huge group, but some people come to knit, some people come to spin, some people come to felt or needle felt.
That can get bloody, though.
Oh, you just stab until you're happy. That's what I tell the kids at school. You just stab until you're happy.
Needle felting means taking the wool and then they have this 2-pronged, very sharp thing that you pound it with to felt it together. It
Yes.
looks scary to me.
It's one of the most relaxing hobbies you can have as long as you don't stab yourself. I've had kids as young as 4 needle felt, and you just teach them to keep their fingers out of the way. And I've had people in their 90s needle felt. It's a great hobby because you can sculpt the wool using the needle into any shape you want.
Well, John, thank you so much for coming here today. It's a marvelous thing. It really is.
It's just spinning.
Yeah, but then you end up with spinning wheel buildup.
I know. I have about 20 now.
Oh. A Fountain of Useless Information is hosted, produced, and edited by Ann O'Connor. Do you have an idea for the podcast? You can reach Ann through her website, annoc.com, ANNEOC.com, on Facebook at Our History AOC, or by calling or texting 978-958-0054. All music on the podcast is in the public domain or is written and performed by the host and guests of the podcast. A Fountain of Useless Information was recorded at the Fitchburg Access Television Studios in Fitchburg. They are on the web at fatv.org.